Hi, this is the second video in a algebra quest, something like the very first chapter of a book, if this were a book, but it's not, of course. I want to talk in this video about the order of operations, which is the order that you do things when you have an expression that maybe has some addition in it, some subtraction in it, some division, some multiplication. What do you do first? Do you just do it in the order it comes? As it turns out, that's not the way we do it. So first of all, what is an expression? An expression might not have an equal sign. In other words, it might not be an equation exactly. It might just be like 4 plus and then parentheses 3 minus 2. Or it might be in brackets 5 times 7 minus 3 in parentheses squared minus 6. These are expressions that don't, we're going to put an equal sign after them if we evaluate them. We might evaluate these expressions following an order of operations. And you may know, probably do know from some algebra course you've had in the past. This is meant to be a series of Algebra 2 videos, so you may have had this at some point in the past. Some kind of a mnemonic that's to help you remember. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or something like that, where the P stands for parentheses, E stands for exponents, M for multiplication, D for division, A for addition, and S for subtraction. So this, you can see that the first letter, of each word reflects something that you do before you in a certain order. So you start with the things in parentheses and get rid of those. Then you do the exponents if it's raised to a power, like if it's squared or cubed. Then you do the multiplication. Then you do the division. Then you do the addition. Then you do the subtraction. So in this particular example, please excuse, we're going to do the P first, and so 3 minus 2 is in parentheses. We're going to do that first. 3 minus 2 is 1. And then we'll be left with 4 plus 1, which equals 5. Now it's kind of like, now it's an equation. But we've evaluated the expression. If you just look at these 4 plus parentheses 3 minus 2, and you're asked to evaluate that expression, by following the order of operations, you end up with 5. So this one's a little more difficult. So we're going to do the P, please, excuse. So we're going to do the parentheses first and the exponent second. 7 minus 3 is 4. But we're not going to multiply by 5. We're going to square it first because it's please, excuse. So 7 minus 3 is 4. Squared is 16. My dear, M. So we're going to multiply next. 5 times 16 is a lot. I'm not quite sure what. 5 times 16 minus 6 is going to turn out to be 80. 5 times 16 is 80. That's right there. And then minus 6 is 74. So that's what order of operations means. You do the parentheses first, then the exponents, then multiplication, division together, and then addition, subtraction together. That's called evaluating an expression. Now there are also algebraic expressions. Algebraic expressions aren't just numbers, but they have letters, or what we call variables. What's a variable? A variable is, the x basically can be more than one thing. It's not like the number 2, which is always 2. X, though, could be any number of things. And that's what makes algebra difficult, because it becomes more abstract. It's not as concrete. When you have 2 things, that's easy. It's just 2 things. But the x is kind of like a I'm going to tell you what this x can be. It can be lots of different things. So take this expression here, an algebraic expression, 2x plus 5y. And of course, as you remember from Algebra 1, 2x means 2 times whatever x is, and 5y means 5 times whatever y is. So if I ask you to evaluate 2x plus 5y if x equals 3 and y equals 2, then we're going to multiply 2 times 3, which is 6, and 5 times 2, which is 10, and we're going to add them together. 6 plus 10 equals 16. Now, x and y are variables. I could have said evaluate 2x plus 5y if x equals 10 and y equals 30. So the x and y are a placeholder for a whole bunch of possibilities. And whatever your problem that you're being asked to solve is, or whatever your teacher tells you to do with the x and the y, they can basically come up with a lot of stuff. It doesn't have to be just one. It doesn't always have to be 3, or it doesn't have to be always 2. That's why it's called a variable. Variable means it varies. It can be one thing one time, and it can be another thing another time. That's why it's a variable. And so in this case, I said, now what if this x stands for a 3? And what if this y stands for a 2? Then what would it equal? And we see it equals 16. So an expression like 2x plus 5y is an algebraic expression. Now, when you have an equation rather than just, say, an expression, there's going to be an equal sign because it's an equation. So there's going to be an equal sign. And so take 5x minus 12 equals 3. Then we're going to solve. We can solve for x. When you have one equation and one variable, you can solve for the variable. If you have two variables, then you're going to need at least two equations to solve it. If you have three variables, then you're going to need at least three equations that are each different from each other in order to solve it. So these are, again, things that you should have had in Algebra 1 and hopefully are things you remember. So, for example, how am I going to solve for x? There's going to be a certain x that makes this equation work. What is that x? Well, I can guess at it. I can say, well, let me try 2. Let me try 4. I mean, you can do trial and error, but you can actually solve for it using a method you learned in Algebra 1. So, for example, you can add to both sides of an equation as long as you add the same thing. Or you can subtract as long as you subtract from both sides of the equation. Or you can multiply as long as you multiply both sides of the equation by the same number. Or you can divide both sides of an equation as long as you do it by the same number. So the first thing I want to do, and I have a video somewhere in the universe of YouTube on this, but if I want to get rid of that minus 12 so I can get the 5x all by itself, well, how do I get rid of a minus 12? How about adding 12? So I can do that as long as I add 12 to both sides. If I add 12 to this side of the equation, then 12 minus 12 is 0. So I'm left with just 5x on this side. If I add 12 to this side as well, which I have to do to keep it an equation, then 3 plus 12 equals 15. So now I have 5x on this side equaling 15 on this side. I've not really changed what's there. I've just altered its form. So now how am I going to get rid of this 5? I don't want to know what 5x equals. I want to know what x equals. Well, again, I can divide both sides by something as long as I divide both sides by the same thing. So I want to get rid of that 5 here in front of the 5x. And so how do I do that? Well, I divide by 5. Because 5 divided by 5 is 1. And that leaves me with just 1x, which is x. So if I divide this by 5 and this by 5, then this is going to end up being x. And 15 divided by 5 is 3. And lo and behold, I've figured out what number, if x equals it, will make this equation work. If x equals 3, then this equation works. And I have solved for x in that equation. There we have it.